Hi everybody, welcome to Live Blogger. I have combined all the videos in the box shadow generator series into this single long video so that it's easy for you to follow. And in this video we are basically creating this box shadow generator for CSS, and we'll be using HTML, CSS and JavaScript to create this. And if I click on generate code, we can see that we have the generated CSS code displayed over here. So we'll be designing this in this video, and I will also leave the link of the source code in the description, and at the end I will also show you how to add this to your Blogger website. So let's get started. So this is the demo of the box shadow generator, and here we can see we have all the elements of the box shadow over here. So box shadow is basically the shadow that you can add using CSS. So here we can see on the right side we have this line of code of CSS where we are setting a box shadow, and these are all the values that we add over here. Now this is basically a tool that can generate this type of code for you. So here we can see we have the X offset, we have the Y offset, blur radius, spread radius and opacity, and then we also have the color, and we can also select whether we want inset or the normal box shadow. And then we have this button called generate code. So when we change these values over here, and when we click on generate code, the code will be generated over here, and you can go ahead and copy and paste it in your CSS. So let's try something over here. So let's change the X offset a little bit, let's change the Y offset, and let's increase the blur radius a little bit, and we'll decrease the spread radius a little bit, and let's also decrease the opacity. So this is how the box shadow looks right now. Now you can go ahead and change the color as well. So if I click on this color, you can select any color from here, and you also have this button called inset, and if I click on that, we can see that the box shadow is inside the element, and if I click on it again, it goes outside the element. And now let's click on generate code, and now we can see we have this box shadow generated over here. We have all the values. We can see we have the offset set to 5 and 5, and we have the blur radius set to 24 pixels, and then we have the spread radius set to -4 pixels, and then we have this color over here. We have set the opacity to 0.2, so that's why we can see we have this alpha value set to 0.2. Now let me just change the color, and let's set it to a red color, and let's increase the opacity a little bit. And now if we click on generate code, here we can see we have the RGBA change to the red color, and if I click on inset and if I click on generate code, we have the inset keyword written over here. So now you can go ahead and just copy and paste this code into your CSS, and you will have the same box shadow added to whatever element you want. So this is basically what we're going to create in this tutorial series. Alright, so here I have created this folder called box shadow generator, and I just opened it with VS Code. Now let's go ahead and create the necessary files. So let's click on new file, and we'll create an HTML file. Let's name it index.html. And now let's create a CSS file. Let's name it style.css. And let's also create a JavaScript file. Let's name it main.js. Let's start with the index.html file. Now in VS Code you have the shortcut where you can just press exclamation and press tab, and you'll have this basic HTML5 code. And here in the title I'll just type box shadow generator, and I will also link the CSS file over here. So I'll just type link and press tab, and in the href I'll just type style.css, and here in the body I'll just link the JavaScript file. So let's type script :src, and in the src I'll just type main.js. Now we're going to use a font called Roboto in this design, so let's get the link of the font. So here I'm in fonts.google.com, so you can search for the font Roboto over here, and here we can see the font is right here. So let's click on the font, and we need to have two versions. We need to have the thin version, so let's select this, and we also need to have the regular version, so let's select this. And now let's click on this button called view selected families, and if we scroll down we can see that the link is displayed over here, and we can just copy and paste this link into our HTML file. So let's copy this code, and let's go back to our HTML, and let's paste it over here inside the head section. Now let's start with the markup of our design. So the first thing we need to have is a heading. So for that let's create an h1, and I'll just type box shadow generator. And let's open this in our browser and let's see how it looks. So I have this extension called Live Server installed in VS Code. So once you install that, you can just right click over here in the HTML and click on Open with Live Server. And here we can see our heading is displayed over here. So let's go back and let's add all the other elements. Now we will add all the elements inside the box shadow generator inside a division, and we'll give it a class of shadow generator, or we'll just call it box shadow generator. Now in this we need to have two sections. One is the controls where we have all the sliders, and then we have the result where we have the box where the box shadow is displayed, and also the code and the generate button. So here let's create a division with a class of controls. So in this we will have all the controls, and then we'll have a division with a class of result. Now since we don't have a lot of elements in the result, let's write the code for that first. So the first thing we need to have is a box that shows the box shadow. So let's give it a class of box, and after that let's create a division with a class of code, and here we will display the code. I'll just write code over here, and then we need to have a button. So let's create a button and let's give it a class of generate code button, and here I'll just type generate code. And now if we go back to our website, we can see that the elements are displayed over here. Now let's focus on the controls division. So here we need to have all the input fields, that is the sliders, the color picker, and the checkbox. And for each of them we need to have a heading. So what we will do is we'll create a division with a class of group, and in that we'll create an h2, and here we will write the heading. So the first one is x offset, and below the header let's add an input field, and we'll set the type to range so that we have a slider, and here we can see we have the slider over here. Now let's set some more attributes over here for the slider. We will set the min value to 0, and we'll set the max value to 50. You can increase the max value if you want, and then we will set the value, the default value, to be 0, and we'll also set the step to be 1, so it will move from 0 to 1 to 2 and so on. And then we'll also give it a class of control, and for this one we will have an ID. So we'll give it an ID of h value. So this is the first group. So let's copy this and let's paste it down here. And the second one is the y offset. So let's type y offset over here, and all these will be same. We'll just change the ID to v value, which is the vertical value. Or let's change this to x value and y value. Right, now let's paste it down over here once more. And the third thing we need to have is the blur radius. So let's type blur radius, and let's change the ID to blur, and by default we will set the blur value to 6. Now let's copy this once more, and this one is spread radius, and let's change the ID to spread. Now for the spread radius you can also have negative values. So for the min value I'll just set it to -50. Alright, let's copy it once more over here, and this one is for the opacity, and let's set the ID to opacity, and the opacity values are from 0 through 1. So let's type 1 as the max value. Now for the default value I'll just set it to 0.3, and let's set the step to 0.1. Right, now we need to have the color and the inset checkbox. So what we will do is we'll create a division with the class of container, because we need to have both these values one next to the other, and in here we'll just create a group, and in that we will have an h2, let's call it color, and below that we'll create an input field, and we'll set the type to color, and let's set the class to control, and we'll also give it an ID of color. Alright, now let's copy this group and let's paste it down here, and we'll just change this to inset, and the type of the input field will be checkbox, and for the ID I'll just change this to inset. Right now let's go back to our website, and here we can see all the elements are displayed over here. So the color is also working alright. We have the inset checkbox. So that's basically it with the HTML of our design. Alright, this is our source code, and before getting started with the CSS, I just want to make a correction in the HTML. So if you go back to our website, here we can see for the X offset and the Y offset, we are setting a min value of 0. So here we can see in the X offset we have set a min value of 0, but X offset can also have negative values, and so does the Y offset. So let's go ahead and change the min value to -50, and we'll do the same for the Y offset. We will change this to -50, and the blur radius does not have any negative values, so everything looks alright. Right now let's go to our CSS and let's start styling this. So we have already linked our CSS file over here. So let's go to the style.css file, and the first thing we will do is style the h1. So here we can see we have this h1 with this heading. So let's target that. Let's tap h1, and we will set the font family to Roboto sans serif, and we'll also set the font weight to 100, and let's set the text align to center. And here we can see this is our heading. Now let's style the box shadow generator. So if you go back to our index.html file, here we can see we have this division with the class of box shadow generator. So let's target this class. Here I'll just tap .box shadow generator, and here also we will set the font family to Roboto and sans serif, and we will set the width to 800 pixels, and let's also add a box shadow, and we'll set the values to 0, 0, 40 pixels, -8 pixels, RGBA, 0, 0, 0 and 0.3. Now let's go back to our website, and we don't have the box shadow added, so here we have a typo. We need to type RGBA. Right now we can see we have this width of 800 pixels for the box shadow generator. Now let's bring it to the center. So let's type margin, and for top and bottom we'll just set it to 0, and for left and right we'll set it to auto. Alright, now the next thing we will do is we'll position all the controls on the left and the result on the right. So here we can see we have all the controls on the left, and here we have this box, this code, and this generate button. So if you go back to our index.html file, here we can see inside the box shadow generator we have this division with the class of controls, and then we have another division with the class of result. So let's add a display of flex to this box shadow generator. So here I'll just type display of flex, and now we can see we have all the controls on the left and the result on the right. We'll also type justify content to space between, and now we can see we have this space between these two elements, and we'll also align items to the center so that they are vertically centered. Now let's set the box sizing to border box for all the elements so that we have the correct height and width. So we will select the box shadow generator and also all the elements inside the box shadow generator. So here I'll just tap asterisk, and here I'll just tap box sizing border box. Alright, now let's add some styles to these controls. So for the controls we have a division with the class of controls. So let's tap box shadow generator controls, and we will set a padding of 8 pixels, and we'll set a width of 300 pixels. Alright, now let's style these headings inside the controls. So here we can see we have this h2 for the headings. So let's type box shadow generator controls h2, and let's set the font size to 18 pixels. We will set the margin to 4 pixels top and bottom, and 0 for left and right, and we'll set the font weight to normal. Right now let's add some spacing between these groups. So if you go back to our HTML file, here we can see we have this division with the class of group, and in that we have the h2 and the input field. The same we have for all the input tags. So let's target this group division. So here I'll just have box shadow generator controls group, and let's set a padding of 12 pixels top and bottom and 24 pixels left and right, and we'll set a margin of 8 pixels and 0. Right now the next thing we need to do is we need to position these two controls one next to the other. So if you go back to our HTML file, here we can see for that we have a division with the class of container, and in that we have these two groups. So let's target this container. So here I'll just type box shadow generator, controls, container, and let's set the display to flex so that the elements are one next to the other. And we'll also set justify content to space between. Right now we can see these two elements are one next to the other. Right now let's style these sliders, and we will increase the width to 100%. So let's go back, and if we go back to our HTML file, here we can see for all these sliders we have a class of control. So let's target the control class. So here I'll just type box shadow generator, controls, control, and we'll set the width to 100%. And now we can see we have 100% width for all these sliders. Now let's also increase the width and the height of this color. So for the color we have this input field with a type of color. So let's target that. Here I'll just type box shadow generator, controls, input with a type of color, and let's set the width to 60 pixels, and let's set the height to 30 pixels, and that looks alright. Right now let's style the result division. So here we can see we have this division with the class of result. So let's target that. Here I'll just type box shadow generator, result, and we'll set the display to flex, and we'll also type flex direction to column, and we'll also bring everything to the center. So let's type align items to the center, and let's also add a padding of 24 pixels, and we'll set the flex to 1 so that it will take up the maximum space it can. Alright, now let's style the box. So here we can see we have this division with the class of box. So let's type box shadow generator, result, box, and let's set the width and the height to 240 pixels, and we'll set the background color to white, and let's also add a box shadow by default. So if you go back to our HTML file, here we can see for the X offset we have a value of 0, for the Y offset we have a value of 0, for the blur radius we have a value of 6, and for the spread radius we have a value of 0, and for the opacity we have a value of 0.3, and the color is set to black by default. So let's go back over here, and let's set the values to 0 for X and Y offsets, and for the blur radius we have a value of 6, and then we have 0 for spread radius, and for the color we will type RGBA 000, and the opacity is set to 0.3. So here we can see we have the box. Now let's add a margin bottom for this box. So here I'll just type margin bottom, and let's set it to 50 pixels. Right now let's style this button. Now we'll position this button relative to this box shadow generator. So for that let's go back over here to the box shadow generator, and here we'll set the position to relative, and let's go back over here, and for the button we have a class of generate code button. So here I'll just type box shadow generator, result, generate code button, and we'll set the position to absolute, and we'll set the bottom position to 8 pixels and the right position to 8 pixels. So now we can see that the button is positioned correctly. Now let's add a padding, and let's set it to 12 pixels top and bottom, and 48 pixels left and right, and let's set the font size to 18 pixels, and let's set the font weight to bold, and let's remove the border. So I'll just have border of none, and let's add a background color of E63946, and let's set the color of the text to white, and we'll also set the cursor to pointer. So now everything is styled correctly. Right, this is our source code, and if you go back to our index.html file, here we can see we have already linked our main.js file. So let's start with the JavaScript. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to reference some of these elements from the HTML into our JavaScript. So we need to reference the box because we need to add the box shadow to the box, and then we also need to reference this generate code button, and then we have all these controls over here. So we have these input fields with different types, but all of them have this class called control. So we'll reference all of these controls. So let's go to our main.js file and let's type const, and first of all let's reference the box. So let's type box and we'll set it equal to document.querySelector, and we have a division with a class of box, and it is inside this box shadow generator class. So let's type box shadow generator box, and then we'll reference the generate code button. So let's type const generate code button equals document.querySelector, and here we'll type box shadow generator generate code button, and then lastly we will select all the controls. So let's type const controls equals document.querySelector box shadow generator, and we have a class of control for all the controls. And here we need to type query selector all because we have multiple elements being selected over here. Right now let's create some variables to store all the values. So we need to create variables for all these values over here. So first of all let's create a variable for the x value. So here I'll just type let x value equals 0 by default. And in the same way let's create variables for all the other controls. So let's type let y value equals 0, let blur value equals 0, and we also have opacity. So let's type opacity value, we'll set it to 0, and let's type spread value 0, and then we have color. So let's type let color value, and for the color we'll just set a value of RGBA 0, 0, 0 and 1. And then lastly we need to set the inset value. So let's type inset value equals false by default. Right now let's add event listeners to all these controls. So let's type controls, and we have multiple elements inside these controls, so we will use a for each loop for that. So let's type dot for each, and for each of the controls I'll just call it C, and let's create an arrow function over here, and let's type C dot add event listener, and we will listen for the input event. And when someone changes the values inside the control, we'll just call a function to update the values, and we'll name the function update values. Alright, now let's create this function. So let's type const update values, and now in this function we'll just update the values of these variables. So we will get the values from the input fields, and we will store them inside these variables over here. So let's type x value equals, and we'll type document.querySelector, and if we go back to our index.html file, here we can see first of all we have this x value input, and for that we have an ID of x value. So let's add that over here. So I'll just type hash x value, and we will do the same for all the other variables. So I'll just duplicate this down over here, and this is y value, and here let's change this to y value, and then we have blur value. These are the variables, and here if you go to the HTML, here we can see blur. So let's type blur over here, and then we have the opacity value. So just type opacity value, and we need to get the value of these elements, so we need to type dot value at the end. So let's add dot value at the end of all these elements. Alright, for the opacity we have an ID of opacity, so let's type opacity over here, and then we have spread value, and for the spread value we have an ID of spread, and then we have color value, and for that we have this ID of color, and then lastly we have inset value, and for that we have an ID of inset. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to change the format of the color value. So if you go back to our design, and if I right click over here and click on inspect, and if I go to console, And here let's select the color. So let's type document.querySelector color, and here we can see we have the color. And if I just type dot value, here we can see we have this hexadecimal value. Now we need to convert it to an RGBA value. So let's create a function for that, and we need to split these values into groups of 2, and we need to convert it into regular values. Right now it is hexadecimal values. So let's go back and let's create a function for that. So here I'll just create a function called hex to RGBA, and here we will get the hex value as the argument. Now let's split this into RG and B. So let's type let R equals, we need to type parse int, and here we need to get the first 2 numbers. So for that you have to type hex dot slice and 1, 3. So this will get the first 2 numbers from this hex value, and after that we need to type 16 because this is a hexadecimal value. And let's duplicate this 2 more times, and we'll change this to G, and we'll change this to B, and here we'll just type 3 and 5, and here we'll just type 5 and 7. So now here we have the value of red inside R, then we have the value of green inside G, and then we have the value of blue inside B, and we are converting it from hexadecimal into integer. And now let's return this in RGBA format. So let's type return, and we will use backticks because we need to use variables. So here we need to type RGBA, and in parentheses we need to pass these variables. So let's type $symbol, and in curly braces let's type R, and then we have a comma, and then let's type G, then we have a comma, and then let's type B, and then we have a comma. And then for the opacity, let's get the value of this variable, opacity value. So let's type $symbol, opacity value. And let me also adjust these initial values. So if we go back to our HTML file, here we can see for blur radius we have a value of 6. So let's type 6 over here. And if we scroll down, for the opacity we have a value of 0.3. So let's add that over here, and here also I'll just type 0.3. Right now the next thing we will do is we'll call this function hex to RGBA. So here when we are setting the value of color value, here I'll just call the function. So let's type hex to RGBA, and we will get the return value and pass it over here to this variable right here, and we'll pass the value of this element as the argument. And now the last thing we need to do is add the box shadow to this box right here. So we'll create a function called generate box shadow for that. So after updating all these values, we will call a function called generate box shadow. And let's create this function over here. So let's type const generate box shadow. And the first thing we will do is we will check whether we have the inset value set to true or false. So let's type if inset value, and if the inset value is true, then we need to add inset inside our code. Alright, so now let's add the CSS to the box. So let's type box dot style dot box shadow equals, and let's use backticks, and here we'll type inset, and let's type $symbol, and the first value we need to have in a box shadow is x value. So let's type x value over here, and then let's add a space. Let's type y value, and then we have the blur value, and then we have the spread value, and then lastly we have the color value. So this is the CSS for the box shadow with inset. Now let's add an else over here, and I'll just copy this line of code from here, and let's paste it over here, and let's just delete inset from here. So this is the code for the box shadow without the inset. And here after each of these values we also need to add pixel. So let's type pixel, and even for the y value we need to type pixel, and for the blur value we need to type pixel, and spread value we need to type pixel, and for the color we don't need to type pixel. We'll do the same over here. Right, now let's save this and let's go back to our website. and let's check whether it is working. So let's move this slider, and right now we can see that the inset value is being added. So let's go back and let's see what's the problem. And if you scroll down here, we can see we are getting the value of the inset element. Now if you go back to the console, if you right click over here and click on inspect, and if you go to console, and here if I just type document dot query selector hash inset, and if I just type dot value, we can see that we are getting this value of on over here. Now we need to get the checked value from here. We need to type dot checked, and now we can see we are getting true or false. So we need to change value to checked for the inset. So let's go back, and here we need to type dot checked. Right now let's go back to our website, and now we can see that all the sliders are working all right. And let's increase the blur radius a little bit. Let's increase the spread radius. Let's decrease the opacity, and everything is working all right. Let's change the color, and we can see that even the color is changing. So everything is working all right. Let's also check the inset, and now we can see we have the box shadow set to inset. So that's basically how you generate box shadow using these sliders. Let's go to the index.html file, and if you scroll down here, we can see that this is the division where we will have the code displayed. So let's go ahead and add the pre and the code tags over here. So I'll just type pre and code, and in this we will display the code. So we will add some code over here by default. So here I'll just type box shadow colon, and if you scroll up, we can see that we have the default values displayed over here. So we have the x offset set to 0, then we have the y offset set to 0, and then we have the blur radius set to 6, we have the spread radius set to 0, and then we have the opacity set to 0.3. So we have to set the color in RGBA format, and right now the color is set to black by default, and we also don't have the inset set by default. So let's add the code over here. So I'll just type 0 pixels for the x and the y offsets, and then we have 6 pixels for the blur radius, and then we have 0 pixels for the spread radius, and then we have the color RGBA, and 0, 0, 0, and the opacity was set to 0.3. So this is basically the code of the default box shadow. So if you go back to our design, this is how it looks right now. Now let's go ahead and write the code for the generate code button. So if you go back to our index.html file, here we can see we have this button with the class of generate code button, and then we have to generate the code inside this code tag, which is inside the code division, which is inside the result division. So let's go to our main.js file, and we have already referenced the generate code button. Now let's reference the code. So let's type const code equals document.querySelector, and we have a division with the class of result, and in that we have a division with the class of code, and in that we have the pre and the code tags. Right now let's add an event listener to this generate code button. So here I'll just type generate code button dot add event listener, and we will listen for the click event, and when we click on the generate code button, we will run a function called generate code. And now let's create this function. So I'll just type const generate code, and if you scroll up, we can see that we have some code over here. So we can use most of this code for the generate code button. So I'll just copy this if condition from here, and let's paste it over here. Now what we need to do is we need to display this line of code inside this code tag over here, and we have already referenced the code tag over here. So here I'll just type code.innerHTML equals, and I'll just add all of this inside backticks, and I'll just remove this backtick from here, and I'll just delete all of this, and here we'll just type box shadow colon. Right now let's copy this line of code, and I'll just paste it over here, and we just need to remove inset from here. Right now let's see whether this works. So let's go back to our web page, and let's change some of these values, and now let's click on generate code, and we can see that the updated code is displayed over here. Let's check out all the other values. Right now let's click on generate code, and we can see that the updated code is displayed over here. Now the last thing we will do is we will add syntax highlighting for this code. So you can just Google for highlight.js and you will find this website called highlightjs.org. So let's go to the website. Now let's click on get version, and here we can see we have the cdn.js link. So we can just copy and paste this link to our HTML file. So I just copy this first CSS link, and let's paste it over here inside the HTML file in the head tag. And let's go back and let's copy the script and let's paste it over here just before the body ends and before the main.js file. And now to make this work, we have to call a function called highlight all. So let's create a script tag, and here you have to type hljs.highlightAll. Right now let's go back to our web page, and now we can see we have the syntax highlighting, and let's click on generate code. And after we generate the code, some things are missing. So right now we can see that by default we have these different colors, and if I click on generate code, we don't have the correct highlighting. So let's go back to our JavaScript file, and after generating the code, here also we will call the highlight all function. So let's type hljs.highlightAll. Alright, now let's go back and now let's change some of these, and now let's click on generate code, and now we can see we have the correct syntax highlighting. Now you can also have different syntax highlighting styles. So if you go over here to the main page, here we can see there are different styles of syntax highlighting. So if I click on this style link, we have different styles. So you can select any of these styles, and those styles will be added to your code. So let's select one of these. Let's change the language to CSS, and I think atom1 dark looks great. So let's go back, and here in the CSS we can just change the style to atom1 dark. Right now let's save this and let's go back to our web page, and now we can see we have different syntax highlighting. So that's basically how you can create a CSS box shadow generator for your website using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Right here I'm in the dashboard of my Blogger website. Now you can add this box shadow generator inside a post or a page. Let's add it inside a post. So let's click on new post, and for the title I'll just type box shadow generator. And then you have to make sure that you are in the HTML view. So by default it will be in the compose view. So you have to select this option and select HTML view. Now here you can add the HTML, the CSS and the JavaScript. So let's go to our source code. Now I will leave the link of the source code in the description, so you can just go ahead and copy and paste the code. So the first thing we will do is we'll copy the link of this font and also the highlight.js styles. So let's copy all these lines of code from here and let's paste it over here. Right now let's go back and let's copy all the HTML. So let's copy it from here and we'll go all the way till the end. So we'll copy it till here, and let's paste it over here inside our post. Now you can delete this h1 from here because we already have this title for the post. So I'll just delete this. If you want, you can keep it. And now the next thing we will do is we'll copy all the JavaScript. So let's scroll down and I'll just create a script tag. And in this script tag we will add the JavaScript. So let's go back to our source code and let's go to the main.js file, and let's copy everything from here. And I think at the end of this line of code we also need to have a semicolon, so I'll just add that over here. Alright, now let's select everything from here and let's copy it and paste it inside the script tag. And now the last thing we need to do is add the CSS. So let's create a style tag over here. And let's go back to our source code and let's go to the style.css file. And let's copy everything from here. And let's go back and paste it over here inside the style tag. Right now let's publish this and let's see whether it looks alright. And here we can see we have this post published, so let's click on view. And now here we can see we have this box shadow generator, and let's see whether everything works alright. So let's change the values of this slider, and we can see that everything is working alright. And let's change the color. Let's also check the inset. So everything is working alright. Let's click on generate code, and we have the code generated. So everything is working alright. So that's basically how you add a box shadow generator to your Blogger website. Alright, so that's basically it for this video, and I will leave the link of the source code in the description. And if you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.
We'll be right back.